Welcome to the Congressional Fire Services Institute's virtual mini symposium series, What's Next? I'm Michaela Campbell, the Executive Director of CFSI, and today's mini symposium will focus on health. This program brings together leading experts from across the fire service, healthcare, and research communities to discuss critical issues impacting the health, safety, and well-being of the fire and emergency services. Throughout the symposium, you will hear presentations on firefighter mental wellness initiatives, occupational cancer screening research, organizational leadership and behavioral health, and the emerging health hazards associated with electrical vehicle firefighting and PPE contamination. These discussions are intended to provide valuable insight into current challenges, innovative programs, and ongoing research aimed at improving outcomes for the fire and emergency services community. A special thank you to the First Responder Center for Excellence and UL Research Institute's Fire Safety Research Institute for sponsoring today's mini symposium. I also want to thank our speakers and attendees for joining us today and for your continued commitment to advancing firefighter health and safety. Now I will turn it over to Emily Griffin, CFSI's Director of Development, who will be introducing the sessions and the speakers.
This presentation highlights Florida's collaborative approach to strengthening firefighter mental wellness following major critical incidents across the state. Led by the Florida State Fire Marshal's Office, the initiative brought together academic institutions and fire service organizations to develop a comprehensive behavioral health access plan focused on clinical care, peer support training, and research. The session will explore the creation of Florida's Mental Wellness Incident Management Team, the expansion of culturally competent behavioral health resources, and the measurable impact these programs have had on supporting firefighter resilience and wellness. The speaker for this presentation is Dr. Deborah Beidel, who is the Trustee Chair and Pegasus Professor of Psychology and Medical Education at the University of Central Florida and Director of UCF Restores, a clinical research center focused on PTSD treatment and research. A nationally recognized expert in traumatic stress, Dr. Beidel has led innovative work using virtual reality to treat PTSD in veterans and first responders and has authored more than 350 scientific publications throughout her career.
Hello, everyone. My name is Deborah Beidel. I am a professor at the University of Central Florida and the director of UCF Restores, which is a clinical research center designed to provide treatment and research in the area of trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. I want to talk to you today about an initiative that we've been involved with for a number of years with firefighters throughout the state of Florida, and that is really building a statewide mental wellness framework for firefighters in the state of Florida. Florida, as you know, has really been, some might call it ground zero. We have the distinction, I guess you could call it, of ranking near the top in terms of the number of FEMA declared disasters over the past 50 years. There are different metrics that are used, but Florida is always somewhere near the top. We've also been the home to some of the nation's most deadly mass shootings. And certainly first responders are always at these different events responding to everything that's been going on. We, along with the Florida Fire Chiefs Association, the Florida Firefighters Safety and Health Collaborative, and the State Fire Marshal's Office, since 2018, started working in the area of how to produce an entire comprehensive framework for behavioral health. And this resulted in a number of things that happened throughout the state, one of which was the establishment of a trauma center here at the University of Central Florida called UCF Restores, where we provide no-cost trauma treatment for first responders in the state. This includes both traditional outpatient programs and an intensive outpatient program that we have demonstrated to be very effective in treating PTSD over a 2 to 3 week period of time. It also resulted in the decision to adapt this entire BHAP framework, and BHAP is a behavioral health access program. But as you can see from the slide that's here, BHAP really consists of a lot of different components. It consists of things like leadership, the use of SISM, trained clinician response teams, chaplaincy, peer support, a number of things, including such things as financial well-being and employee assistance programs. Throughout the state of Florida, we have adapted this and have worked very diligently with a number of different departments to establish one of these in each of their locations. So as far as the behavioral health services here at Restores, we've treated about 1,500 firefighters for trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. We've trained over 2,000 peer support specialists, as well as working with chaplains and canine support teams. We've also developed training programs for clinicians that will allow them to understand the work of the fire service and the culture. One of the things that I often get complaints about from people out in the field is, Doc, I called this therapist, but she started crying when I started to tell her about the traumatic events that I've experienced. And so what we have made a mission on behalf of the BHAP program is to provide education to clinicians about what the fire service is, what the work entails, what they'll hear, and how to work more effectively with people. So that's been fairly successful. And now throughout the state of Florida, we have over 250 what we call culturally competent clinicians who have taken the courses, have participated in ride-alongs, and are working both inside and alongside departments to deliver mental health resources when they're really needed. One of the things that's developed from all of this is that we now have a mental wellness team that is activated during state emergencies that will provide critical mental wellness support to the first responders who are responding to different emergencies. And for the rest of this talk, I'm going to talk about the structure of those different components and also our work over a number of tragedies that have occurred throughout the state of Florida to show you how we put this all together and what it is that we can do to really bolster the mental wellness of our teams as they're out in the field. On this slide, you can see the different kinds of components that are deployable, that can be deployed during any kind of event. And really, depending on the nature of the event, we may deploy different aspects of this. But it includes, chaplaincy, critical incident stress management, psychological first aid, canine response, trained peers, and also the clinician response team, all under the leadership of a mental wellness command. On June 24th, 2021, the Champlain Towers building collapse occurred down in South Florida, right outside of Miami. This was a 12-story tower that pancaked one floor onto the ones below it. 136 people were in the building that night, 98 of whom perished. All were recovered. And this turned out to be the third largest loss of life in the United States if you exclude terrorist attacks. There were 22 million pounds of debris that were removed over about a 29-day period, just about a month, and 394 members of urban search and rescue teams were deployed to the site to look for those who had perished that night. And this was the first time that the mental health resources were deployed, although not quite in an as organized a fashion as we have them now. But it was really our first attempt to provide support. One of the things that I was told as I was getting ready to go down and assist was that, particularly in Florida, most of the urban search and rescue teams had really been deployed during hurricanes, and therefore although there was always some loss of life, there was not the extent of loss of life in such a small, compact area. This was the real first experience of this type for the teams. And so there was obvious concern about what they were going to see, how they would process it, and the mental wellness team was brought in to try and help with this particular event. As I said, it was rather a unique event for Florida at the time, just the sheer enormity of the destruction that occurred. And we knew that recovery of the deceased would take weeks. It also occurred in extreme heat. It was June in South Florida, so the heat was really bad. The humidity was very high. There were the typical South Florida thunderstorms that occurred daily and required people to get off of the site for their own safety. And also we had the threat of a hurricane that was coming in to South Florida in about a week's time from when we first got there. The teams worked valiantly, and part of the job that we had was getting them to come off the shift after their shift was over because of wanting to stay and find everyone as quickly as we can to provide closure, of course, to the people who were waiting to hear about their loved ones. Some of the things that we did, this was a time because things were ongoing, was the selection was to use psychological first aid and not do a lot of extensive debriefings, but to just help people in the moment, make sure they had support, make sure that they had resources that could be utilized. And so the teams that were sent down were peer support teams, chaplains, some clinicians, comfort dogs. The dogs were always very popular when we go to these type of events. We also did some distribution of palm cards that had relaxation instructions and website for further information. We left those all over the place, particularly at the food stations, where people could just pick it up and put it in their pocket, have it for use later if they wanted to, but just as a way to get information out there as much as we could through as many means as we could. One of the challenges that we really had at that site, and I'll come back to this again later in the presentation, was that we were on site, but we didn't have any real private working space for conversations when they were needed. As I say in some of my other presentations, disaster sites don't come with HIPAA compliant sites available to be able to talk to people. And much of the work we did during that event was either under a tree, sitting on a curb, trying to find some quiet spaces. So we did the best we could, but it was really something that we kept in the back of our minds as to how we could really do this better, so that when we would talk to people, go up and, give them some water and ask how they were doing, we didn't just get fine. That we would have the opportunity to open up a conversation with people about what the work they were doing and listen, not poll, but listen to what it was they wanted to tell us at that particular time. We also were concerned about having therapists and clinicians available, not only just in the immediacy of the event itself, but to be available afterwards. We are lucky in Florida. One of the resources that we developed is something that's called Red Line Rescue. And Red Line Rescue is a website where first responders in distress, we have Blue Line Rescue for police, Red Line is for fire and EMS, but where firefighters in distress wanting to talk to someone can go online and can use the search feature to search for a peer support provider, a clinician who is listed on this website, having been vetted by a group of people who run the website. So basically, if someone is experiencing some distress and wants to talk to another peer, they can search by geographic area, by age, by whether or not the other person is a veteran, and a number of different types of search features are available. And basically what they will come back with is a list of trained peer support specialists who will then be available to talk to them about whatever it is that they're experiencing. So people on the website have agreed to be contacted by other first responders who just feel the need to reach out and talk to someone. The same thing for clinicians. First responders can search for clinicians who have been trained in the culture of the fire service, who provide evidence-based treatments, and who are listed on the website under various types of searchable features, again, including location, including type of therapy that they would like to seek, may include whether or not insurance agencies are affiliated with the person, whether they can bill directly to insurance, what is their sliding fee rate if they have one, a number of different features. So this is something that in Florida we have developed as a result of our collaborations, allowing people to really find the resources that they need. One of the things that I found during the Surfside initiative was that we fielded many calls and many emails from therapists who wanted to come down and help, but who had absolutely no expertise in working with trauma, in working with people in distress, and who we felt were not going to be very helpful for the kinds of operations that we needed to carry out on that day. So Red Line Rescue allowed us to go to that site and contact clinicians in the area who were trained and who did know what to do. The other thing we did was, because we knew that, just because everybody went home, that this was not going to be the end of this event or the end of people thinking about this event that they had just experienced, was to create a spreadsheet that had vetted clinicians in each of the different USAR search and response areas. So teams were pulled in from all over the state for this particular operation, and we wanted to have clinicians available for when they went back to that area, whether it was in the Panhandle or Jacksonville area or Orlando, wherever it might be. We also vetted these clinicians to make sure that they would be available should someone call them. With the mental health crisis in the country as we know it, and also then in Florida, where we have a severe mental health crisis in terms of not nearly enough therapists for the number of people in need, we didn't want first responders to be given this list, told to call, and then told that there was a 4-month waiting list before they could be seen. So our response was for me to call, vet these clinicians, and get them to understand that they would only go on the list if they could provide an appointment within a week or 2 weeks at the very most. So in that way, we had clinicians who were not only trained and culturally competent, but were also immediately available. I took a picture of this, which was on the tribute fence where people were leaving flowers, because to me, this really speaks to what's going on during a disaster and the challenge of trying to meet the needs of our first responders who are obviously there to do a job. But the idea that we're hurting too, we just can't show it yet. And the need for continued resources after the event is over. As I said, clinicians are one part of it. But one of the things that we have done from these deployments is also to develop a mental wellness demobilization plan. And if anyone needs something like that for their own use in a different part of the country, please feel free to reach out to me and I can send you what it is that we have put together, because it really contains specific information about what is the normal reaction to traumatic events, what should be happening to you in the next couple weeks. Should you have such, problems with sleeping or eating because of some of the things you might have seen? How long do you allow that to go on? How do you know if it's getting better? When should you seek out professional help? It also provides resources for family members who are often very concerned when their loved one is deployed on this type of event. And it provides them with information as to how to help their first responder, particularly when the deployment may last several weeks. So this was something that we distributed to everyone who was there, and it was also emailed and sent back to the departments where they were returning, so that everyone have copies of it and be able to use it afterwards as needed. We also had a procedure set up for peer support teams in the various areas so that they also could look out for the people who had been deployed and just be available as needed for them should they want to reach out for some help. The after action report from Surfside, as well as some earlier incidents in which we were involved in a more unorganized fashion because we were reacting to the traumatic events that were occurring within the state, really identified the significant need for both immediate and longer term mental wellness resources, and as well as just what we know of as the typical everyday job stressors. But it really reinforced once again this idea of blue sky work, to get things in place, have plans in place while you've got time and there's no emergency going on, and building capacity for this mental wellness resources before the gray sky conditions come again. And for us in Florida, it wasn't very long before the next gray sky condition occurred in the form of Hurricane Ian. And Hurricane Ian really represented the first time that we were really organized as far as being under a mental wellness team that was integrated with the overall incident command from FEMA and the state of Florida to respond to Hurricane Ian. And Ian made landfall on September 28th in 2002, so just about a year later. Admission orders in that case for first responder mental health was initiated on the very first day of the state emergency response plan initiation. And at that time, we were deployed to the uniform command structure that was located in Orange County, Florida. So in the convention center there, we were set up along with the rest of the FEMA command center. The initial mental wellness strike teams that actually went down into the damaged area in Southwest Florida were deployed 2 days later on September 30th. This gives you an idea of the incident command structure and how we were set up. So we had the director of a state mental wellness branch was rotated among 3 senior members of the firefighter leadership in the state of Florida, as well as a liaison with the International Association of Firefighters who joined in on this response. Then, as you can see down further in the structure, we had a planning committee, we had an accountability, we had operations, and the planning committee had several parts to that was further sectioned off for organizing the canine teams, organizing the chaplains. As the clinical psychologist, I was one of the 2, along with my colleague, Dr. Adair, who organized the clinician response for this particular event. The mental wellness strike teams, there ended up being a total of, I think, about 8 teams. We expanded once we got started, but each team consisted of 2 peer support specialists, a chaplain, and a canine team made up of another peer support specialist along with the trained canine companion dogs. One of the things that came to our attention was really the need to track and deploy where everyone was going to go. How we were going to keep track of where the teams were at that particular time. As you can see from the picture, Hurricane Ian was a monster and really impacted Lee County, Charlotte County, Sarasota County, and parts of Collier County. So we were faced with this problem of sending out these teams, how we were going to keep track of everyone, because the initial Excel sheet that we were using did not really seem to be up to the capacity and capability of what we really needed to use. So we quickly adapted an app called Beacon Trek Medic, which we could use for the peer providers who were out in the field. And this app, a snapshot of which is here, allows you to dispatch people to sort of classify them by, is there an immediate need? Are they in the queue and are they scheduled? As you can see, you can track by teams where the teams are at any particular time, at what city they were in. You can also track according to the map, so you can see where people are. And this mapping was particularly important because if a call came in that there was an immediate need for a peer support team in an area, we could easily figure out who was closest to that and reroute them and send them to where there was an area of greater need. The app really did a number of things for us that was really important in this response, and that was enhancing the safety by using GPS tracking in these forward operating positions that allowed us to keep track of our teams, particularly in high-risk environments, because this was definitely an area. I mean, there's lots of debris, flooding. I-75 was shut down, as you can see there by the red line, for a period of time. As we were trying to work the way through it. It also confirmed the coverage. We knew with GPS tracking where the teams were, how much longer it was until they could get to their destination. And this worked even in the areas where there was no cell phone coverage for a number of days. Centralizing the dispatch was a lot easier than having 4 of us, doing text messages or telephone calls to find out who was where and where they were going. And it allowed check-in, as I said, and incident reporting. So we knew right away if things were going well or poorly. This solved some of our problems for safety and accountability of where the teams were, but it wasn't giving us a real picture of where we were needed and keeping track of, on the mental health side, high acuity calls. How many contacts did we have? What were they? How were they using them? And so we started with ArcGIS, which is something that's used out in the field. This particular dashboard was really constructed for our purposes. It allowed us to develop surveys that the teams out in the field could use, and we could also, again, geotag and track their progress. I'm going to show you a brief little video of these of this survey that we developed, so you can see how this works. It's basically, you can put in an event that occurred. We knew if the contact coming in was coming in from a peer provider, or if it was coming in from a clinician, which team, if it was one of the teams, how much time they were spending at the encounter, how many individuals they had, the contacts, number of people. So you can see we were able to get a pretty comprehensive count of what was going on. And we were available to put this on a dashboard that we could use at the Incident Command Center to keep a running total of the number of surveys that came in, the number of contacts that were made, how many of those were mental health in terms of needing to be referred to a clinician, and then whether they were resolved, how many were outstanding, surveys by team. But it gave us a lot of information as to what was going on right out in the field in real time that we could keep track of. We had 12 teams that were active throughout the deployment and did about 5,000 contacts in the particular area. These are the palm cards that we hand out. I highly recommend. They're very popular for use in these kind of emergencies. It gives people numbers that they can get to immediately. For help, we also have a QR code that allows it to be used in that fashion to reach various people. The back of the card has, again, numbers that were specific for first responders and veterans, as well as other numbers for specifics for civilians that allowed us to really get a variety of resources out. Again, we have to vet most of these resources every time to make sure that the numbers are still good numbers. We at UCF Restores have what we call a single session consultation line, which is a line for first responders to call if they just need to talk to someone during a stressful event. We had 35 calls during the active deployment period from first responders in the area who either wanted to talk about the personal stressors they had because their homes were impacted by this event, or who were part of the search and rescue teams who had seen something that they needed to process. So 31 of those calls were stress management. The other 4 were asking where they could get blue tarps for their houses, for their roofs. But we were able to help them with that as well. I think the need for clinical services during this period of time became more apparent as we were visible at the service center. As I said, we had a number of peers contacted the licensed clinician at the command center to report a first responder who was in distress, and the clinician could then conduct a risk assessment over the phone and provide some follow-up information. As we were there and visible, we had people at the incident command center who asked us to do impromptu debriefings and psychological first aid with USAR teams who had experienced some pretty horrific events as part of the work they were doing. FEMA was using us for psychological backup by their medical team when there were events that were ongoing. And again, we created rosters of culturally competent clinicians to send everybody home with them to have those kind of resources for afterwards. A couple of things we found out. Peer support really is a great force multiplier in the sense that we could send people out there who could be the eyes and ears and escalate an incident to a higher level if needed. first responders loved the canine teams. We would get requests, can you send a peer team and please send a dog? One of the things that we found was that we really needed to be on site when we could, and really could not be on site as a result of the destruction that was down there, and there not being a lot of empty hotel rooms for peer support teams or clinicians to get to. And we certainly didn't want to take resources away from people who had lost their homes. But that continued to be an issue as we tried to deploy down into the areas where the disasters occurred. In disasters such as Surfside or mass shootings, it's a little bit easier in the sense that there's not destruction of the area and buildings are not impacted or flooded. But after hurricanes, there's a real need for figuring out how to do this. Just some quick statistics that we, continue to deploy during these types of events. Hurricane Helene that occurred more recently. Also, Hurricane Milton was an interesting one because there was flooding on the west coast of Florida and really bad tornadoes that were spawned by the storm on the east side of Florida as well, requiring us to split up our teams and work two different disparate sites at one time. Just some of the successes and challenges that we had. Peer support teams were welcome. Calls from individual stations once they knew we were in the area were asking for someone to stop by is continuing to increase. Our consultation line continues to be used. I spoke about the lodging and needing a base of operations. And I joke about it in the sense of saying a boa constrictor is not a therapy animal, but that was something that happened during the Surfside building collapse. Someone showed up on site, managed to get through security because he had a therapy animal, and it turned out the therapy animal was a boa constrictor. What we have been able to do this last year with support from the state and from some money from Lockheed Martin was we now have a 34-foot trailer, a resiliency command center that contains within it some living and sleeping quarters for peer support team and clinicians, but also has two private consultation rooms where peers or anyone in need of distress, whether it's a civilian or first responder, can go into one of those rooms. There are steps, so people don't have to jump in, but our steps, they're private rooms, HIPAA compliant, that can either allow them to just have some quiet time alone or allow them to meet with a member of the peer support team or a clinician who may be traveling with that team to just talk about what they're experiencing, kind of process it. The idea is moving from providing treatment afterwards because of an event that occurred to actually trying to mitigate operational stress and keep what's happening during that time from developing into a larger problem at a later date. Certainly, we won't eliminate all of it, but if we can get in there where people are and try to mitigate the stress that they're having during that period of time, we may be able to keep people at their operational best, allowing them to complete the mission and go home healthier afterwards as a result. So since we purchased this and this vehicle was delivered last year, it was the first year in Florida in a long time where we didn't have any hurricanes. So we haven't yet had the opportunity to take it out due to a disaster. But I look forward to coming back at some time in the future and telling you about the ability and the utility of such a vehicle during a hurricane and an operational event. I want to thank you all for the time that you've taken today to listen to what it is that we're discussing today and how we in the state of Florida are trying to build an integrated mental health mental wellness program for the fire service. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at either the email address below or through our website, which is www.ucfrestores.com. I appreciate you taking the time to listen today.